Thank you.
Recording in progress.
Hello. May we request everyone to please settle down. We will begin in 2 minutes. Again, may we request everyone to please settle down. We will begin in 2 minutes. Good afternoon to our speakers and distinguished guests from the government, the diplomatic community, the academe, and think tanks. I'm Joyce Reyes. I am the Deputy Executive Director for Strategic Engagements of the Strat-based ADR Institute, and I will be your host for today. Welcome to today's conference entitled Safeguarding the Indo-Pacific, Strengthening Partnerships to Meet Emerging Cybersecurity Threats. Now, this event is organized by the Strat-based ADR Institute in partnership with the Center for a New American Security. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. Now, cyber threats in the Indo-Pacific have been a growing concern, largely due to the increasing digitization of economies and the intensifying geopolitical competition. From state-sponsored cyber attacks to malign influence operations, the Indo-Pacific faces a diverse array of cyber threats that target governments, businesses, and individuals alike. Now, these threats have various effects, jeopardizing economic growth, eroding trust in government institutions, sowing division within communities, and undermining national security. And that is why today we are gathering government officials, cybersecurity experts, members of the diplomatic community, and policy experts to evaluate the cybersecurity landscape in the Philippines and the broader Indo-Pacific region. Our conference today also aims to identify possible opportunities for partnerships to strengthen collective efforts in safeguarding the cyber landscape of the region. So to officially open our afternoon session today, may we call on the president of Strat-based ADR Institute, Professor Victor Andres Dindo Manhit, to deliver his welcome remarks.
Thank you, Joyce. Good afternoon to everyone. Allow me to welcome everyone to our session this afternoon. And I wanted to focus on this idea of how can we build partnership as a form of deterrence to cybersecurity threats. In Strat-based ADR Institute, for those of you who have heard us speak, discuss, raise issues, we continue to track what we call risks and opportunities. And this is what we've been doing for the past 20 years. And we always put it from the context of strategic thinking. That's why the word strat-based. And when we look at the Philippines today, we see how important we are from a strategic point of view, especially when you look at maritime security, supply chains, and data connectivity. And even with data flows, a lot of people don't realize how our archipelago connects a lot of parts of Asia within our archipelago. And last January, we raised the issue of what we call a digital divide, political divide. That as we pursue a digital-ready and cyber-reliant society, the rise of cybersecurity issues, spread of misinformation and disinformation is very important. And we need to address it. Our own Secretary of Defense, in our conference on fortifying cyber cooperation, used the term, we are patient zero. And being a patient zero is a reality of a society where a big percentage of population are part of the digital world. We see it in mobile connections, at least 99.3% of our population. Of course, the secret of that is we carry a second phone, maybe. Good for the telco business. But also the use of the internet and even social media users. This kind of reality is what I believe challenges us today. And put it in the context of the asymmetric security challenges that we are dealing with. True, we can speak of alliance building, multilateral cooperation, rules-based international order. But we're also dealing with cyber warfare, gray zone operations, and disinformation and misinformation. And what is this to strat-based? Our own national security policy identifies in their framework from 2022 to 2028 cyber information and cognitive security as a national security interest and a national security agenda. It explicitly recognizes the importance of cybersecurity with the overall goal of cyber resilience. And I remember our own president, after his visit to the APEC, spoke about it. I'd like to quote him, "Our cooperation on cybersecurity is also a priority as it impacts both national and economic security. Critical infrastructure, whether with respect to ports, to energy, telecommunications, they will require cybersecurity measures. And these systems form the backbone of our military infrastructure, our hospital systems, our agricultural, manufacturing, and service sectors." This afternoon, we are here today with the objective of bringing thought leaders, thinkers together. After the President spoke of that, I wrote in my regular column in the Philippine Daily Inquirer, and I said, the Philippines stands to gain from like-minded partners in the field of cybersecurity. We can always learn from the best practices of other countries and assess how this can be adopted in the Philippine context. I have on many occasions and statements called for greater investments in cybersecurity. Without a sound cybersecurity posture, all the digital technologies that we use will be risky and may become a gateway for devastating cyber attacks against our economic and national defense system. Allow me to share how we should be working on this. Our strat-based brief on pursuing the Philippine digital transformation agenda spoke of achieving a digitally transformed and competitive Philippines as it necessitates a whole of society approach. It's not only government, it's not the private sector, it's not just the international community, but we need to work together. As we try to secure a digital order, we need, as I've said, a whole of society approach. And in my next slide, I wanted to emphasize that as we increasingly deal with this complex geostrategic landscape, a whole of Philippine society approach is critical to fully participate in the global digital economy and ensure cyber resilience. This approach opens a space for cooperation and innovation between the public and the private sector. And we need like-minded countries working with us. We appreciate the presence of our ambassadors. We appreciate the presence of the private sector. We appreciate the presence of practitioners in the Philippines and government officials since this morning in our early session. We need to work together and help the Philippines address this key concern on cybersecurity. Again, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Manhit, for that insightful welcome remarks. Definitely set the stage for our discussions this afternoon. So, moving forward to our keynote speaker for today, he is the Secretary of the Department of Information and Communication Technology, Honorable Ivan John Uy. So, unfortunately, the Secretary will not be able to join us today as he is currently on official travel, but he did send us a recorded message. And so, ladies and gentlemen, let us all listen to the message of Secretary Ivan Uy.
Her Excellency Mary Kay Carlson, Ambassador of the United States, President of Stratbase, Professor Dindo Manhit, Spokesperson for the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Colonel Francel Padilla Taborlupa, National Security Fellow of the Philippine Council for Foreign Relations, Lieutenant Colonel Chavez Arceo, our friends and partners from Stratbase ADR, and the Center for a New American Security, other esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, pleasant day to all of you. Although I cannot join you in person today, my thoughts are with you. As we come together to tackle the critical issue of cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is a formidable global challenge, particularly as we navigate the fourth industrial revolution. Our digital lives are inextricably linked to our physical security, making cybersecurity paramount. With the rapid growth of digital citizens and increasing ICT accessibility, we are at a crucial juncture where safeguarding cyberspace is more urgent than ever. The Philippines has been at the forefront of many of these challenges. Once ranked one of the most cyber attack nation in Southeast Asia and 10th globally. As of May 2024, our department has actively responded to 3,210 of 3,925 reported cyber incidents, successfully mitigating and closing 82% of these cases with an average resolution time of 30 days. This is a testament to our efforts to strengthening our cybersecurity framework and response mechanisms. Under the visionary leadership of His Excellency President Ferdinand R. Marcos Jr., significant strides have been made in fortifying our nation's cybersecurity. On April 4, 2024, the President issued Executive Order number 58, adopting the National Cybersecurity Plan for 2023 to 2020. This comprehensive roadmap aims to secure our cyber landscape, identify critical and establish protocols for effective threat response. The NCSP marks a pivotal moment in our secure digital future. Our cybersecurity objectives are threefold. 1. Proactively protecting our state and citizens in cyberspace. 2. Enhancing our cybersecurity workforce. And 3. Strengthening our policy framework. Collaboration with industry partners and cybersecurity firms is essential, leveraging their expertise and resources to bolster our defenses. These public-private partnerships facilitate vital information exchange, drive collaborative research, and implement joint projects to counter evolving cyber threats. Despite our progress, challenges remain. The first is our policy framework's adaptability to rapid digital advancements. Our position as number 61 of 182 nations in the 2020 Global Cybersecurity Index reflects our strength in legal frameworks and collaborative initiatives. Yet, we must continue to evolve. The second challenge is the digital divide. Disparities in technology access and digital literacy exacerbates cybersecurity risks, particularly in rural and marginalized communities. Bridging this divide is crucial for equipping all Filipinos with the knowledge and tools to defend against cyber threats. The DICT's efforts through its Cybersecurity Bureau include promoting personal and organizational cyber hygiene, conducting cyber-related training and webinars, and spearheading the CyberSafe PH campaign. These initiatives aim to instill responsible digital citizenship and enhance our collective cyber resilience. The third challenge is a shortage of cybersecurity professionals. This is a global issue, with many skilled individuals trained in the Philippines being recruited abroad. Addressing this requires a dual approach, incrementally encouraging cyber awareness and adopting a jumpstart strategy to overhaul our cybersecurity education and professional incentives. We are intensifying training and capacity building initiatives, nurturing the next generation of cybersecurity experts through scholarships and programs like Hack4Gov and Computer Emergency Response Team Essential Training. These efforts are necessary to ensure a steady flow of talent to protect our cyberspace. Cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. We must continually adapt our policies, enhance our capacity building initiatives, bridge the digital divide, and ensure a constant influx of cybersecurity professionals to maintain a secure digital environment for everyone. I extend my gratitude to Stratbase ADR Institute and the Center for a New American Security for their initiative in strengthening partnerships with key allies in the Indo-Pacific region. This collaboration is vital in fortifying our cyber defenses against emerging threats. As we celebrate National ICT Month this June, our vision of a safe and secure cyberspace aligns with our Bayang Digital concept. Our Kinabukasang Progresibo, or progressive future, underscores the need for inclusive national ICT development through strategic planning, dedicated implementation, and robust government-citizen collaboration. This initiative is crucial for the Indo-Pacific region's united stance against cyber threats. Thank you very much. Rest assured, in our Bagong Pilipinas, we will steadfastly intertwine national progress with robust cybersecurity measures, guaranteeing a resilient future for all Filipinos. No one shall be left behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Ivan Uy. Indeed, no one should be left behind. And as he said earlier, cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. And on that note, we are very honored to have with us today some very important people who will also deliver special messages for us today. For our first message, let us all welcome the Ambassador of the United States of America to the Philippines, Her Excellency Mary Kay Carlson.
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in today's event. Secretary Uy has been a great partner on this issue for the United States, including through the pandemic when multiple, monthly meetings were held at the working group level to keep us all on the same page. Delighted to see our former State Department Cyber Coordinator, Chris Painter here, General Allen, fellow ambassadors, my good friend Dindo, and the many other distinguished guests here, Philippine government colleagues and experts. It's really great to see you here. I don't have to tell anyone in this room that the risks that we face from malicious cyber activity are grave. Today's topic rightly assumes that we know the stakes and asks us to consider how to strengthen partnerships to meet common threats. At the RSA conference in San Francisco just last month, Secretary of State Blinken laid out a vision for how the United States plans to forge an international community of allies, partners, and stakeholders that will shape the design, development, and use of cyberspace and digital technologies. He identified the basic principle of digital solidarity, emphasizing that our policies and engagements should aim to provide mutual assistance to victims of malicious cyber activity and other digital harms. Digital solidarity is a valuable principle for centering international technology efforts because it aligns our national interests with those of our partners who share our core values in key areas: governance, combating transnational crime, and building resilience. So what does this mean in practice? It means agreeing that trust and cost effectiveness can coexist when developing new infrastructure for digital sectors and future economies, including, for example, undersea cable systems and high-speed telecommunications networks. It means enhancing digital and cyber capacity to support resilient ecosystems, fostering the growth of data-dependent industries that employ millions, such as the Philippine business process outsourcing, BPO sector here. And it means standing together with partners to hold actors accountable by publicly attributing their bad behavior. As we have heard from Secretary Uy, the Philippines is implementing its new National Cybersecurity Plan. I commend the Secretary and his team for completing this plan, and I'm proud that the United States, through USAID, supported its development. We are already seeing the results of this effort. The Philippines recently joined the Counter-Ransomware Initiative, a platform of over 50 countries that rapidly shares information on cybercrime trends. This enables members to strengthen defenses and respond to emerging threats in real time. We've increasingly begun building cyber into our defense cooperation. Last year's Balakatan exercise included a cyber defense component for the first time ever. Today, several combatant commands like the Indo-Pacific Command and Cyber Command have their own programs with the Philippines. In a few weeks, the United States will host the inaugural U.S.-Philippines Cyber and Digital Dialogue that General and I talked about. This engagement will elevate technology cooperation as a part of our bilateral relationship, making the Philippines the second country in ASEAN where the United States has a standalone mechanism to discuss cyber and digital issues. The dialogue agenda will feature discussion on a wide range of topics, but today I'll highlight just three particularly high priority areas. First, integrating cyber cooperation into our broader alliance modernization efforts. Second, enhancing cyber and digital cooperation to support our economic interests in data-dependent sectors. Third, utilizing trusted equipment as the Philippines develops its digital sector. Success in these areas is not guaranteed. However, by convening forums that bring together private sector, technologists, academia, and governments, we cultivate a community focused on digital solidarity. This community gives us an opportunity to shape the technological future we all desire. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at today's program. Maraming salamat po. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Mary Kay Carlson. All right, to deliver another message, we are also privileged to have with us today the Australian Ambassador to the Philippines, Her Excellency Hye Kyung Yu.
Thank you. Maraming hapon. No. Magandang hapon, right? Magandang hapon sa inyong lahat. And I'd like to start by thanking StratBase and the Center for New American Security for organizing this very important conference. And of course, for inviting me to speak today. But before I do, I wanted to say, though, that if we think these threats are emerging, well, we are kidding ourselves. Because as we all know, even as we speak, cyber attacks are happening right now. In fact, in Australia, on average, one cyber crime is reported every 6 minutes. And with ransomware alone, it's causing up to $3 billion in damages every year. Every year. But you know what's more concerning? It's the fact that these attacks are affecting millions of people's lives in a fundamental way. And it's actually threatening our national security and economic security. These are what we're talking about here. So, cybersecurity is unfortunately an urgent problem, and it's the one that we need to act right now. This is why, like the Philippines, Australian government has released its new cybersecurity strategy last year. In our strategy, we talk about 6 cyber shields to protect ourselves from cyber attacks. And you're going to hear some similarities between ours and the Philippine cybersecurity. And you will also see that our 6th shield is what's at the heart of what we're talking about today. But I want to go through all 6 with you quickly to give you a sense of how Australian government is looking at this problem, but more importantly, solutions. Our first shield, cyber shield, is strong businesses and citizens. So they are better protected from cyber threats and can quickly recover following a cyber attack. Because, making an assumption that it's never going to happen, once again, we're being naive. So we have to face the world where this will occur. But it's about how we are going to recover quickly from that and how we're going to help our communities to actually deal with this. Our second shield is safe technology. So Australians can trust that their digital products and services are safe, secure, and fit for purpose. Our third shield is world-class threat sharing and blocking by ensuring we have access to real-time threat data and ability to block threats at scale. Our fourth shield is protected critical infrastructure and essential government services, so they can withstand and bounce back from cyber attacks. Our fifth shield is to have sovereign capabilities in cybersecurity and industry, just as Secretary Uy talked about. We need these capabilities, sovereign capabilities in our countries. And the final shield, and the most important one for today's conference, is to achieve a region which is more cyber resilient and that prospers from the digital economy. And of course, this is where the Philippines comes in for us. As Australia's important neighbour, friend, and strategic partner, the Philippines is one of our top priority countries under our sixth shield. As such, Australia has been working really hard with the Philippines already to cooperate on cybersecurity bilaterally, on regional programs, and on multilateral fora as well. For example, I'm really proud of this, but on 28th of February, which was when Prime Minister Marcos was in Canberra for his guest of government visit, Australia and the Philippines signed a memorandum of understanding on cyber and critical technology cooperation. One practical example of such cooperation is the Royal Australian Air Force working with the Philippine Air Force to deliver 2 mobile training teams covering cybersecurity fundamentals. And this program is going to take place in the next 2 weeks, so very soon. And under Australia's Cyber and Critical Tech Cooperation Program for Southeast Asia and the Pacific, Australia ran 2 workshops in Manila on countering and building resilience to disinformation, misinformation, and malign influence. We also delivered 3 cyber boot camps. I love that title, boot camps. And we had really senior officials, USECs of many departments, military personnel attending this right across the Philippine government agencies. And we've provided many scholarships for Cyber Law International's online executive courses, because without knowledge, how can you put up a fight? And what's really interesting is that Australian government has been building a regional cyber crisis response team. This team has not yet had the opportunity to assist the Philippines with some of your attacks, but we have actually done some amazing work with our Pacific Island country neighbors, so one to keep an eye on. And of course, at a multilateral level, Mary Kay also talked about how the Philippines has recently joined the Counter-Ransomware Initiative in April 2024, in fact, and Australia is really delighted to be able to work with the Philippines in that regard. But more can and needs to be done. I'm sure you all agree with me on that. So Australia wants to continue to help the Philippines build your capability around dealing with cyber threats. And we want to work with you to uphold international law and the rules and norms of responsible state behavior in cyberspace. Sound familiar? A bit like what we're doing in the South China Sea, yes. And there are really great mechanisms through which we can do this, like the UN Open-Ended Working Group on Cyber. So I encourage the Philippines government to really step up in your engagement through that group. We want to work with the Philippines to protect human rights as well in the UN Ad Hoc Committee Cybercrime Negotiations. When like-mindeds put our minds together and effort together, it's amazing what we can achieve. We also want to continue to deter and respond to malicious cyber activity. To this end, Mary Kay once again talked about attributions and sanctions. Australia is really keen to explore use of these tools with the Philippines. Australian government is already doing it, but this is where, if we work together to build broader coalitions, then we can really increase the power of deterrence. And finally, we want to progress our shared objectives through regional forums such as the ASEAN Regional Forum. So Philippines and Australia, we're members. We have to take charge of this very important issue and provide leadership. So as you can see, there is still a lot that needs to be done together. So in closing, I would like to reiterate Australia's strong support and commitment to work together with the Philippines. And by the way, that's not just the government. This is not an issue that can be solved just through government-to-government cooperation. We want to work with the private sector, civil society, academia, and others, like very supportive international partners in the Philippines, so that together we can ensure a cyber-resilient region that can truly prosper from the digital economy. Maraming salamat po. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador HKU. Finally, we are honored to have with us today a former commander of the NATO International Security Assistance Force in Afghanistan. He is also a retired U.S. Marine Corps 4-star general and a former principal director of Asia and Pacific Affairs in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. Let us all welcome retired General John Allen.
Ambassador Carlson, Ambassador Yu, Ambassador Hartman, Professor Manhit, it's wonderful to be with you all today, and it is terrific to be back in Manila. a city I have come to love in a country for whom I have great respect. My service in the Philippines with the Armed Forces of the Philippines were some of the greatest moments of my career in the Marine Corps. I'm very proud of that service, which took me through the Philippine Islands, but in particular to Mindanao and to the Sulu Archipelago. It was a great honor for me to serve there. But I also have the great privilege of having Philippine blood run in the veins of my family. The mother of my son-in-law was born here in the Philippines, and it is with great pride that I say that my grandchildren are the children of the Philippines. My remarks today are my own. I don't speak for the Department of Defense or the U.S. government. I don't speak for the Department of State or the American Embassy or any of the private sector entities with which I am involved. These are my own remarks, and they come from many years of experience in the global environment in which we now find ourselves dealing in cyberspace, which is a borderless domain. So I've been asked to speak about the opportunities for the U.S. and the Philippines to more closely cooperate on cyber defense and to forge a critical path forward to that end. First, let me say that I have not seen the world more volatile and potentially combustible since the end of the Cold War. China, under Xi Jinping, is on the march. His unprecedented third term as president and his consolidation of power into solitary leadership has set China on a path of confrontation in this region. Russia is similarly on the march, and that march for domination of its near abroad was met with and is still being met with stiff resistance, not just from the Ukrainian, but from a coalition of states led by the United States. Like Xi in China and Putin in Russia, has consolidated a power to make these two states very aggressive and potentially very dangerous autocracies. And neither of these developments bode well for the Philippines or bode well for the United States or our partners and allies in the region. Second, the Sino-Russian joint statement of 4 February 2022 should be mandatory reading for the officials of the world's democracies. That statement is clear, and it's really a Chinese and a Russian manifesto for how they see their path forward in the 21st century, a path defined by their own values and their definitions. Third, cyberspace, the heart of our discussion today, has in many ways become the strategic high ground of the 21st century. Cyberspace as a domain defines nearly every dimension and shapes virtually every aspect of our respective countries' existences, from our economies to our critical infrastructure, from our healthcare to scientific research, from the education of our children to our social intercourse. Our principal definitional activities occur within and through cyberspace. It's been said that while we live in the physical domain, our relevance exists in the cyber domain. And here in cyberspace are defined our greatest strengths as free and open societies, but also our greatest vulnerabilities, for unlike the physical space, cyberspace is borderless. It is omnipresent and can be the domain for the lawless and the anonymous. Fourth, conflict, ladies and gentlemen, occurs along a continuum. It's often misinterpreted or used interchangeably with the term war in the physical domain. War in the physical domain, as it's occurring in Ukraine, in Gaza, and in Yemen, is certainly a dimension of conflict, but the larger dimension of conflict today orients on the modern domain of cyberspace and takes the form of direct efforts to influence our populations, to attack and corrupt and steal and destroy our data, and to attack our networks and our digital infrastructure. And in so doing, it damages our economies, it threatens our critical infrastructure, it disrupts the peace of our societies, and erodes the public confidence in our institutions, in our governments, and in our private sector. So I hope I'm not surprising anyone around this table when I say that I consider that we exist today in a state of hybrid conflict with Russia and China. And it is from this point of departure that the community of democracies must now realize the reality of the 21st century conflict and recognize that if indeed cyberspace is the strategic high ground of this era, then the integrity of data and the sanctity of our data networks and infrastructure must be defended from the near constant onslaught of our adversaries and our enemies. If indeed we choose to think in these terms, then the measures we take now for the protection of our national security must be a primal objective of all of our countries and must be, of course, central to the defense strategies of our military and the intelligence communities. Yet this is also a whole of society struggle. And while the Philippines and the U.S. can and must find greater opportunities to collaborate and to cooperate in cyber-related exercises, in training and education, in talent development, in technology transfer, and in joint cyber defense, there are enormous capacities within our private sectors as well, which are every day defending themselves against relentless attacks in cyberspace, against their data and against their data networks. These capacities must be leveraged in a whole of society approach. Both the Philippines and the United States have published important documents in the last year that have codified for both countries a commitment to deal with the challenges in cyberspace. For the Philippines, the National Cybersecurity Plan, established by President Marcos through Executive Order 58 this year, marks a bellwether of national commitment to dealing with the security and the protection of Philippine data, its networks, and its infrastructure from cyber threats of all kinds. For its part, the United States government and our private sector have focused heavily on cyber defense, but also collaborating and cooperating together as we go forward as allies, increasing our capacities for both national and collective self-defense against cyber attacks. This is reflected throughout our 2023 DoD cyber strategy, and the first U.S.-Philippine bilateral cyber digital conversation that will be held in Washington in July is a great step forward in that direction. The conflict and the war involving Ukraine is the prototype war of the 21st century. For years, Russia assaulted Ukraine's cyber domain in a pre-war cyber conflict, which systematically set the conditions for Russia's intentions to wage physical war on Ukraine to erase its existence. Putin had declared Ukraine had no right to exist apart from a made-up Russian identity, no right to exist as a sovereign entity. And in the 11th hour, 5 minutes before midnight, so to speak, as Russian forces massed for the inevitable invasion, the U.S. and other friendly government and key members of the private sector evacuated Ukraine's national data into a secure hyperscale cloud, preserving it from coordinated attacks by Russian tanks rolling across the border and from the first Russian missile strikes on data centers and data infrastructure. The Russians had intended to dismember Ukraine's data infrastructure and decapitate Ukrainian leadership from its national data. The 11th hour measures by private and public sectors saved Ukraine from devastating losses in the cyber domain as the Russians sought, as it turned out vainly, to attempt a coup de grace in the physical domain. So I'm sorry to have gone over my times, but let me close where I started. I don't remember the last time I've seen this kind of volatility in the global system. The liberal rules-based order is under direct assault by the Russians and the Chinese. And in this long-term hybrid conflict, the Philippines is the subject of direct Chinese attacks on Filipino data and its data networks, a direct assault on Philippine cyberspace. Now, last week, Chinese Coast Guard vessels physically attacked Philippine vessels and small boats in the western Philippine Sea. Several Filipino sailors were injured, and I pray for their rapid recovery. But just as the Russians dismissed the idea of distinct Ukrainian sovereignty, China has dismissed the Philippines' legitimate claims to this water and this sea space, and has ignored international arbitration that firmly established Filipino sovereignty. In other words, the rules-based system, as we have embraced it, carries no meaning to them. I don't believe time is on our side in this conflict. And in the context of our mutual defense treaty, we need to move forward leveraging all assets of our respective countries and our private sectors to harden our cyber defenses from these attacks. Taking a page from what we've seen and we've learned from the war in Ukraine, we must assume that Chinese actions in cyberspace are not only aimed at destabilizing segments of the Filipino society, it's aimed at setting the conditions for successful Chinese military operations should these long-term conflict-engaged matters erupt into physical war. So we gather here today for a very important commitment to build a critical path forward together, the United States and the Philippines, but more broadly, the United States and the Philippines as part of a community of nations, like-minded nations, bound together by our values to oppose this aggression in cyberspace. We can't start too soon. And for me, at my age and with my experience, this struggle is not theoretical. Going to war is not theoretical. I do not want to go to war again. And one of the ways to avoid going to war is be strong in cyberspace, to develop the capacity to defend ourselves, to build deterrent strength that shows the world how powerful we can be together as like-minded nations. Every time I see my precious grandchildren, I think about how proud I am of their Filipino heritage. For me, that's something truly to celebrate. But for me now, it's also something to defend and to protect. Salamat po.
We'll have a quick photo opportunity. May we invite back on stage Ambassador Carlson, and Professor Manhit. Also, Mr. Vivek, please, with General Allen. Would you like to join them as well? It's okay, sir.
Equally interesting. Well, pretty good excuse. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Nice to see you.
And let me just pass this coin as a commemoration. Say thank you so much for your
Oh my God,
organization.
thank you so
Appreciate it.
much. I appreciate it. All right, thank you very much to our ambassadors and to General Allen for those very insightful and also very comprehensive discussion or special messages. So we will now proceed to our panel for this afternoon. Our panel for this afternoon aims to address cyber-related issues across various sectors and generate recommendations on strengthening cyber resiliency and cooperation among like-minded partners. So for this panel, before we proceed to the discussion part, we will first invite our panelists on stage one by one to deliver their opening statements. And if I may request to our panelists, please limit your opening statements to 5 minutes, if possible. All right, so allow me to call on our first panelist for today. He is the head of ASEAN Government Affairs of Microsoft. Let us all welcome Mr. Maciek Surowiec.
Thank you very much. I must admit it's really hard to speak after General Allen, but I'm humbled to be here, and thank you, General, for your remarks. And I'll actually go back to 2016. I happened to join Microsoft in Brussels, 2014. I worked a lot with the EU and NATO, and I had the privilege to attend 2016 summit for some of the cyber-related conversations at the outskirts of the meeting of heads of state. And that was a special summit from cyber perspective, because that was the one when NATO declared cyber as the 5th domain of warfare. And Ambassador, you going back to your point, is the threat emerging? I think it was emerging at the time. I don't think we recognized, the significance of that threat. And then fast forward to today, these are some of the examples of some of the 400 groups that we track as Microsoft from nation states. And each of them has their own characteristics. They operate differently. They are after a different type of intelligence or operations. But the world has changed, and has changed a lot. We feel like we have a very different vantage point than other companies. This is a picture from our digital crimes unit working. When I joined 10 years ago, they were actually investigating very sophisticated cyber crimes. So they were reverse engineering malware and trying to understand how those cyber criminals work. And then also our elite team of lawyers were going after them in different jurisdictions, trying to take them down. Now we actually repurposed part of that team, which figure out how to weaponize trademark law, and then take down some of the websites used by nation state thanks to state or court-sanctioned operations. And that landscape has changed even further as we've seen governments and corporates moving to the cloud, because we started operating with an unprecedented amount of threat intelligence. Just to put things into perspective, we're dealing with hundreds of millions of data points per second. We're dealing with 4,000 attacks per second that we're trying to stop. I would say most of them successfully. So that's something that allows us to understand how the cyber threat intelligence landscape really looks today. And how does it look? Well, it doesn't look promising, and I'm a European, so you have Atlantic Ocean in the middle. But if you shifted the map and you had Pacific Ocean in the middle, you would realize that the surroundings of the Pacific Ocean are actually some of the most attacked countries in the world. And I think that's part of the reasons why we're here today. The second reason is that those attackers, they don't go after any organizations. They increasingly go after critical infrastructure organizations. And that's something that's extremely worrisome and something we should all reflect about as we discuss at the panel. A big topic for this morning conversation, which some of us attended, was influence operations. And we actually unpacked some of the nation-state-led operations, two most recent ones, one by Iran, one by Russia around Paris Olympics. I'm not sure Tom Cruise knows that he was starring in Russia and made video using AI to help spread some of the disinformation. We have actually unpacked that operation pretty sophisticated level and made it public. And that's part of the change how Microsoft started operate. We actually make those attributions public, and we unveil the evidence because we feel like that's important for all the players, including the governments as well. When it goes to South China Sea, we have actually unpacked some of the operations conducted by two threat actors mainly, Raspberry Typhoon, going after intelligence collection here in the region, and second, Flux Typhoon, both attributed to China, which goes after critical infrastructure organizations. This is part of our digital defense report, where we publish some of those findings at a very detailed level. And I know many governments reach out to us for those insights, and we're helping to understand the threat landscape the way we see it. But probably just to wrap up, in general, and you spoke about Ukraine, I think that there were some lessons from Ukraine which are extremely relevant to the Philippines as well. And some of them you already called out. The first one is the principle of partnerships. You kind of can't find this battle on your own. The second one, the example you gave about one of the first missiles hitting a data center, it highlighted the importance of leveraging global hyperscale infrastructure in order to disperse your IT operations and not to be vulnerable to a single attack taking down your government services. And then the final one is how do you leverage threat intelligence in hyperscale cloud to protect those endpoints? Like last time I checked, I'm Polish originally, last time I checked, Ukrainian state still functions and delivers citizen services, which is pretty impressive, fighting a war against some of the largest and more powerful states in the world. But Ambassador, you're going to be thrilled for me to mention this one, because you were talking about shields, but you forgot about one important shield, something that Prime Minister Albanese and Microsoft President Brad Smith have unveiled together with Australian Signals Directorate and Microsoft, bringing together the threat intelligence and the collaboration that helped to address already some of the incidents. One of them was public around Medibank, where some of the data of Australian citizens was unveiled, and thanks to the collaboration, those responsible can be held accountable. Let me pause in here. Hopefully that's provides some food for thought for the panel.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Maciek Surowiet. Okay, also with us today is the president of the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise Foundation and a former cybersecurity coordinator at the United States Department of State. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Mr. Chris Painter.
Thanks. It's a great pleasure to be here today and with all of you, and this morning as well. I'm a recovering lawyer. As I used to say, I used to be a prosecutor doing cybercrime cases. And normally, especially after lunch, you try to break the ice by telling a joke. And normally you tell a lawyer joke. But the problem I found over my long career with lawyer jokes is that lawyers don't think they're funny, and non-lawyers don't think they're jokes. So, that's a lawyer. So I've been doing cyber in some capacity for about 33 years now. I started as a criminal prosecutor doing cybercrime cases in the 90s when no one really cared about it as much. I then went to the White House and did a lot of the cyber policy stuff with the National Security Council, including with our Five Eyes partners and others, where we're taking cyber more seriously as a national security threat. And then I became the first cyber diplomat in the world at the State Department for about 6 years before leaving the government. So I have a lot of experience in both seeing the threat and also seeing our response. And the threat has, as everyone has said, and I quite agree, we don't need to convince people in this room that this threat is still there, is increasing. The threat has increased dramatically. I think General Allen said it very well. This has now become, because of the way we live our lives, really an existential threat. It's affecting everything in our lives. We're dependent on technology in ways we never have been before. People are taking it much more seriously. And the threats we're seeing really across the board, from criminal ransomware groups to malicious activity by nation states, particularly China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran, and in this region, China especially, not surprisingly, is, I think, a real challenge. We're seeing not just the kind of traditional espionage we might expect from nation states, but we're seeing both disruptive activity, but also preparation for the battlefield, if you will, General Allen, in terms of what we see some of our adversaries doing to, if there is a hot conflict, to use cyber as a tool. And so I think one of the best examples of it are some of the intrusion sets we've seen, Volt, Typhoon, and others, where we see penetration of critical infrastructure, not to take it down right now, but to have the capability, if we ended up in a geopolitical crisis, to take it down. And that's something that should concern everyone here, because that is not just cyber as a separate domain. And I think the title of the panel was As a New Domain. It is, but let's not forget this is integrated in all the other domains. We can't think of cyber as this separate thing, this kind of boutique thing that, well, there's cyber over here and there's everything else over here. Cyber and our physical critical infrastructure, our warfighting capability, everything are tied together. And so we need to think in those terms. I think increasingly we are, but one of my top level messages is that, look, the people in this room, by and large, do cyber a lot or know something about cyber or know the cyber policies. The people we often have to convince are the people who are not in this room. The people who are often, and this has gotten better, but often the the leaders, the political leaders, the presidents, the prime ministers, the legislators, the national security advisors often. There's this big conference they have every year called the Munich Security Conference. Great conference. Brings together all these major leaders. And cyber is almost never on the main stage. I mean, I think it's only been there with surveillance one time. And that is a lost opportunity. We need to mainstream cyber into issues around national security, priority, economics, human rights, and foreign policy. It is that important to what we're doing going forward, and convincing those people that it's important is critical. Now, I'm heartened to hear what's happening in the Philippines recently, including the new 5-year plan, the remarks by the leadership here of how important this is and understanding that it's more important. Again, I think things like Ukraine and ransomware has made this much more real. So that, I think we're getting there, but we're not quite there yet. And there's also very other hopeful signs. I think the counter ransomware initiative, which is now 60 some, or maybe even larger than that countries, which was started only a couple of years ago, is a collaboration not just of the usual suspects, but a larger like-minded group, including now the Philippines. I'm really happy to hear that as well. I think our speakers from this morning all have been part of it for a while. I know Australia leads some of the actual response capabilities for that group. And that's great too. That's operational collaboration, that's pushing back on adversaries, now mostly criminal adversaries there, but not exclusively. We know countries who are safe havens for some of these criminals. So I think that's a kind of collaboration we need to have. We need to have policy collaboration. We need to do more capacity building together. The organization I help run, the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise. The Philippines has been a member for a while. We have 60 countries, 120 total partners and implementers, which include academia, the private sector, and others, Microsoft as well. Is a good collaborative effort to raise capacity building, and certainly we know that's a big need around the world. That's also a way to increase the size of the tent, get more of the countries who are on the fence about these issues involved, which I think we need to do. But I think the challenges still are, how do we push back against this aggressive activity? Not just prepare ourselves, harden the targets. We talk about deterrence by denial, great. But we also need to be better at deterrence. We need to be a bit better able to go after some of these threats that we have. And there's been a number of joint attributions that have been done over the last few years. I'm happy to see that. The first one was Sony Pictures back in the day, and then there was a Russian worm, NotPetya, a North Korean worm, WannaCry, caused major damage. That was great, getting many countries to condemn that. Russia doesn't really care if you condemn their activity. China used to care. I'm not sure they care as much anymore. So we need to go beyond the joint attribution. We also need to increase the participants in those attributions and figure out what tools we can use to shape these other countries, these nation state aggressors and criminals too, so they don't attack us. And that's not an easy thing, but that's where we come to the point of this whole discussion. How can we collaborate together? How can we build those partnerships between governments and industry? I will close quickly with another joke, which it used to be a lawyer joke, but I'll turn it into a hacker joke. So a hacker is walking down the beach. He finds a lamp. He rubs it, and predictably enough, a genie comes out. And genie says, look, you get 3 wishes. You knew that already, right? You get 3 wishes. But because you're a hacker, there's some strings attached. And the hacker says, okay, what are they? He goes, well, the genie says, well, everything you wish for, every other hacker gets twice as much of. And the hacker's like, okay, fine. So he says, what do you want? What's your first wish? And the hacker says, I want 1 million Bitcoin. So he gets 1 million Bitcoin, but every other hacker gets 2 million Bitcoin. Hackers are kind of competitive people. This is kind of annoying. He likes the fact he got 1 million, but everyone else having 2 million really bothers him. And the genie says, hurry up, what's your second wish? He says, well, I want a big crazed supercomputer, giant supercomputer, and he gets that. But every other hacker gets that, plus IBM's Watson, their big supercomputer. And again, really kind of upsets him, just irks him. And Genie says, what's your third wish? I need to get back in the bottle and watch I Dream of Jeannie reruns. what do you want? And the hacker pauses, he thinks about it and says, I'd like to donate a kidney. So every other hacker donates 2 kidneys, they all die, he's alone. So the lesson of that joke is that, I've seen through my whole career how hackers, whether they be nation states or criminals, have gotten progressively more clever, have been good in cooperating with each other, more than we cooperate sometimes with among the defenders. And the only way we're going to be able to actually make progress is for us to come together as a like-minded community, both governments, private sector, civil society, and take this threat seriously, really convince everyone this is a real threat, and take action against it. So thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Chris Painter. Our next panelist is the Cyber Section Chief and Deputy Director at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. Joining us all the way from Japan via Zoom, let us all welcome Mr. Keiichiro Sasaki.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, from Tokyo. My name is Keiichiro Sasaki, Cyber Section Chief, Deputy Director, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Japan. It is a great pleasure for me to have the opportunity to speak on this occasion, and especially thank you Stratbase, ADR Institute, and the Center for New American Security for organizing this event. I would like to talk about our diplomacy and the policy coordination in this region to generate recommendations on strengthening cyber resiliency and the cooperation among like-minded partners. The threat of cyber attacks is growing rapidly, especially we need to continue paying attention to malicious cyber activities impacting our critical infrastructure. This includes stealthy and targeted malicious activities for future crises through quietly pre-positioning on the networks. In Japan, ransomware attacks caused by system failures at the Nagoya Port Container Terminal in July last year, shutting down terminal operations for approximately 3 days. Also, malicious cyber activities that could potentially undermine the foundation of democracy embodied by free, fair, and secure cyberspace cannot be condoned. Japan will strive to maintain and uphold universal values and principles in cooperation with other countries and lead an international community. In this regard, Japan believes efforts to call out malicious cyber activities targeting democratic institutions and electoral processes are important. In this context, I believe strengthening our efforts in the field of diplomacy is essential, since it is important to aim to foster trust, reduce threats, and reduce miscalculations as well. In the G7 Puria Leaders Communique recently, we are pursuing a fourfold approach to counter malicious cyber activities. One, promoting responsible state behavior in cyberspace. Two, improving cybersecurity, including in the private sector. And three, developing and using tools to deter and respond to malicious state behavior and to cyber criminals and disrupt the infrastructure they use, including by enhancing coordination on attribution processes, and four, strengthening our partners' cybersecurity capacity. Our diplomatic efforts are in line with the idea and can be classified into four categories. First, imposing costs on cyber attacks. This includes strengthening information gathering and analysis, as well as attributing and publicly announcing malicious cyber activities to enhance cyber deterrence. Second, promoting the rule of law. This includes deepening discussion on rules and norms to deepen shared international understanding on how existing international law applies to cyber operations, including through the United Nations. Third, enhancing capacity building efforts to reduce vulnerabilities and secure risks of the world. Finally, promoting cyber dialogues with its ally and like-minded countries to advance and strengthen these three pillars in a coordinated manner. Enhancing public-private cooperation is also important under this pillar. There are many international efforts and projects, so I would like to briefly touch on several iconic diplomatic efforts in the Indo-Pacific region. First, in April, the leaders of Japan and the Philippines and the United States confirmed that the three countries look forward to holding the very first trilateral cyber and digital dialogue to explore additional cooperation opportunities among the three countries. Also, the Quad is a force for good, committed to bringing tangible benefits to the region. We reaffirm our steadfast commitment to our Indo-Pacific and are undertaking efforts to provide capacity building in the Indo-Pacific region by the Quad countries to strengthen the ability to defend their government networks and critical infrastructure from cyber disruptions. We also conduct various capacity building programs, especially in ASEAN, and for example, at the ASEAN-Japan Cybersecurity Capacity Building Center, AJCCBC, and Japan has provided training programs in AJCCBC for more than 1,700 people during the last 5 years. And our Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA, also dispatched an expert to DICT to enhance DICT's capacity for cybersecurity. So I would like to pause here and looking forward to the discussion in the panel. Salamat po.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Keiichiro Sasaki. Now, our final panelist for this afternoon is a board member at the Philippine Institute of Cybersecurity Professionals. Let us all welcome Mr. Francisco Ashley Acedillo.
Madam Ambassadors, President Dindo Manhit, I'd like to give special thanks to him for not giving up on me. This is my second invitation, albeit the second one that finally I was able to make it to. I'd also like to commend General Allen. Nothing like a grizzled veteran and a Marine general to sort of rally the troops. And it's especially relevant in light of recent events. If the question is how to strengthen partnerships in Indo-Pacific, especially around cybersecurity, I think we need to cover 4 points in this way so that we are able to determine really how we should strengthen these partnerships. And I'd like to cover in the ensuing discussion, time permitting, of course, the following. The surge in the volume and intensity of cyber attacks against both Philippine government organizations and private businesses. The types of cyber attacks that are particularly troubling for cybersecurity defenders. The necessary steps government and the private sector must take in view of the current cyber realities. And what effects revisionist powers like China, Russia, and rogue states like North Korea and Iran have on the cyber threat landscape. On the first point, for the period January to April of this year alone, we have had 39 cyber incidents involving government agencies, 3 of which have had repeated attacks. DepEd has had 5, PNP has had 3, and the Coast Guard has had 2, just to name a few. As of June this year, we can add to this list the prominent compromises of companies like Jollibee, Maxicare, Toyota Motors, and others. Maybe a more appropriate question now is, who else has not been attacked? Or better yet, who has not yet owned up to being compromised? A global cybersecurity company listed the top 12 cyber attacks, and I'd only like to mention a few. I'd like our government agencies and private companies to pay particular attention to the combination of phishing, spoofing, and social engineering attacks, supply chain attacks, insider threats, and AI-powered attacks. On the last type of attack, this is especially troubling for cybersecurity defenders, given the combination of AI with what is now emerging as quantum computing and its ability to tear to shreds any conventional or even military-grade encryption, as well as the tremendous amount of data that is available not only as training sets for AI models, but also as sources of open source information for cyber threat actors. Cybersecurity researchers use the nomenclature APTs, or advanced persistent threats, for cyber threat actors that are clearly nation states or are strongly affiliated with certain countries notorious for organizing, providing resources to, or giving sanctuary to organized groups of highly sophisticated hackers. As to the necessary steps government and the private sector must take, I always get this question in one form or another: what should we do? Are we helpless in the face of these threats? Or is there hope? There are three fundamental reasons why cyberspace is as insecure as it is and why currently cyber threat actors have the upper hand. One, the chaotic and unplanned nature of the internet. That is, one technology stack on top of another. Two, the tendency of technology inventors and developers to put a premium on function over security, and not both. It is only now that we are thinking of things like security by design or security at inception. And three, closely related to the second, the premium given to speed to market and quick commercialization of technologies, as epitomized by mottos like move quick and break things, or speed kills. Unfortunately, speed kills both ways. And lastly, and I agree with several of the gentlemen that have been here in the podium and their mention of Ukraine. Ukraine offers a lot of lessons indeed for us in cyber. But one of these is that the much ballyhooed talk about cyber warfare as it is emerging has not yet fully emerged, as demonstrated by the example of what Russia is trying to do with Ukraine. So people are trying to say now that this is merely talk about, or this is merely the reality of cyber. It's not cyber warfare, but merely cyber in war, or cyber as a tool of war. That being said, I believe that closer to our shores, any move that involves a takeover of Taiwan or a takeover of certain portions or the entire South China Sea will have early warning signs in cyberspace. And as such, we must look at three types of partnerships. One, involving our ASEAN neighbors, specifically Singapore, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Vietnam ranks number 7, Singapore ranks number 17, and Malaysia ranks number 28 in the 2022 Harvard Kennedy School Cyber Power Index. And we ask ourselves, why are they able to make such headway? They are good examples for the Philippines to study in terms of not only building up capabilities, but also being clear with our intent to use our cyber tools. The second type of relationship are those involving the Five Eyes. I am aware that we have very robust existing initiatives involving the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Canada. And we would also like to welcome probably efforts from New Zealand as well. And lastly, and has been mentioned already by our good friend from Tokyo, third set of our relationships should include what we would call our natural allies in the form of Japan and South Korea. That said, these are the 5 areas where any partnerships must be built on or should center on: capacity building, cyber threat intelligence sharing, coordinated incident response and cyber defense, and a global concerted effort for internet governance and the safe and secure use of ICT. I very much welcome our discussion in the ensuing minutes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Francisco Ashley Asedillo. So quite a lot to unpack from those very comprehensive opening statements that we just heard. So without further ado, I would like to invite everyone again, all our panelists back on stage so we can proceed to our panel discussion. That will be moderated by Dr. William Emmanuel Yu, IT Director of the Parish Pastoral Council for Responsible Voting. Again, we have Mr. Chris Painter, Mr. Maciek Surowiec, and Mr. Francisco Ashley Asedillo, and Mr. Keiichiro Sasaki will still be joining us, I think, from Japan.
All right, so thank you very much for such an engaging 5 minutes. I think there's a lot that has been said already, and I have the distinct pleasure of being the person to read questions in front of you. Right, so thank you very much. I'd like to thank StratBase again for inviting me here. So first off, I think it was quite clear that cyber is embedded in all domains. It's not just a fifth unique domain, but it is something we should cover across the board. Second, it was mentioned a while ago by Madam Ambassador that cyber is actually dual use, right? A lot of the technology that underpins cyber communications, finance, etc., can be actually used both ways. Hence, they are targets for incessant threats from threat groups that have suffix typhoon and storm and so on and so forth, right? And third, of course, there's also this discussion that the internet, I think Ace mentioned this a while ago, wasn't exactly designed for security in mind, right? And I will testify to that. I founded an ISP long time ago, and we never really thought that it would be misused. The whole DNS system was a trust-based system that was just on a text file, actually, that was shared amongst players in the DNS ecosystem. So cyber wasn't exactly baked in to how we designed the internet protocol in the first place, and that's a good point that was mentioned by Ace a while ago. So to start off, I think much has been discussed. Cyber has been identified as important for national security. So may I start off with how a cyber, like pick your favorite threat actor, aggressive actor story in terms of geopolitics, and if you could share it with the audience, just as an icebreaker. Thank you. I'd like to go first. All right. There you go.
By the way, I think it's interesting. We talk about typhoon and we hear thunders in the background, so I find it actually a great backdrop for this conversation. I will actually pivot your question a little bit, and I'll get a little bit provocative so that we spice up this conversation. And I'll pick up on something what Chris has done during his remarks. He spoke about hackers almost in a cartoon way. It almost feels like a teenager with genie in a bottle. And like, let me break it to you, this is not the case. These are intelligence agencies of some of the rogue nations, which spend their days and nights working against some of the freedoms that we all want to protect. So the landscape is very different. I think that that's a first step we should take, just acknowledging who we're dealing with. The second is on a more positive note. If we just reflect who you have just heard. You heard two ambassadors of Australia and the United States. You've heard a representative of the Japanese government. You obviously have representatives of the Filipino government. So I think that this is a great example that this collaboration and acknowledgement that this is a shared threat is already recognized. And the fact that you see industry as well, hopefully, contributing to the cyber posture, that's perhaps like the big shift that has changed, that has occurred over the last couple of years. So kind of my takeaway from that is, like, yes, you can pick up on specific cases of rogue actors, but I think that it's more important to think about the whole landscape, how it changed, and how it's going to drive our decisions here looking forward.
Great. And your favorite story, if you don't mind sharing?
Here's my favorite story. So when I joined the company, I was looking into what are some of the most interesting hacks and how you can kind of hack. And one of the most interesting one I read about was when people think that air-gapped networks are secured, well, actually some researchers have proven that if you use vibrations, you can generate some computer operations to extract data even if the network is, or the computer infrastructure is on an air-gapped network. But then I would say don't get fixated about those research-like lab scenarios, because in reality, most threat actors, they're actually after your emails. They're after your documents, after your PowerPoint presentations, after your Excel spreadsheets. That's what they're after. So I'm actually less keen to talk about those specific examples, more thinking about the big picture here.
There you go. So thank you very much. So let's not focus too much on vibrations to hack your air-gapped network. Although speaking of air-gapped networks, I do have a customer whose problem is, oh, we're secure because we have an air-gapped network. What happens in air-gapped networks is that these systems generally are not updated. So they may be, in one particular example, PLC was using some ancient version of Windows that wasn't updated. All it took was a misbehaving administrator plugging in the wrong thing or clicking the wrong email, and air gap's gone, right? So sometimes that thought that it's air gap gives us that false sense of responsibility. But the vibration story is great, because I also heard a story about the screen and the color changes, to hack a network. It was something else. Thank you. All right. Who else would like to add? Ace?
Well, I don't have a specific threat actor, but I'd like to point out in the Philippines case, or I think this is the case in most countries, is that, and to me this is the horror part of the story, is that the ability, as represented, and Chris mentioned this, the ability of threat actors, for example, like Volt Typhoon, to reposition themselves in critical infrastructure, ready to pounce in case of a geopolitical conflict. A similar type of prepositioning in our critical infrastructure in the Philippines actually keeps me up at night, even as a private individual. And the lack of visibility of our government of these critical infrastructure, I think anywhere from 70 to 80% of which is in the hands of the private sector, makes it an even scarier proposition. Now, that said, I've also spoken to at least 3 global cyber threat intelligence companies, and I've asked them, do you actually really know what an AI-powered cyber attack looks like? And their answer, without any doubt and without any variance, was that they don't actually know. However, what's clear now is that AI is being used in social engineering attacks, only, as of yet. So if you talk about a fire and forget AI-powered cyber attack, that is yet to reveal itself, and we'll see that pretty soon enough. However, the sophistication of the SolarWinds attack, for example, which did not require an AI to design and conceptualize, continues to amaze me. And think about an AI-powered or an AI-designed attack, which far surpasses the capacity of humans to look for certain trends, for certain patterns, which a machine is better at than compared to a human. Of course, it cannot substitute a human's creativity, but imagine a threat actor not directed by AI, but enabled by AI. That to me is an equally terrifying or even a more terrifying proposition.
Yeah, and Ace makes a good point about dwell times, right? Even today, without thinking about critical infrastructure, I believe I saw a study that said the average dwell time of malware on Philippine networks is over 200 days. Meaning they're inside, they're doing nothing, and they only trigger after that. And the reason why we know is because when they are exploded, when the payload is actually used, we do forensics behind the scene to determine when it came in, and it's actually that long. So that's the scary part of it all. Right, Mr. Painter?
Yeah, well, I have lots of stories, so we don't have time for me to go into all the stories, and some of them I can't say here. But there's hacker stories, there's nation state stories, and I agree. There are still the traditional hackers, the people who eat pizza, the whole stereotype. There's still script kiddies, there's still kids, but we have changed that. We have very sophisticated nation state actors. We have very sophisticated transnational criminal groups. In the U.S., the Director of National Intelligence for years now has ranked the major cyber threats in a public report, where it's China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. The first two up there, full spectrum actors. The second two catching up quick. And I don't know what this new collaboration pact between Putin and North Korea is going to do in that area as well. But also transnational criminal groups and others can be very disruptive too. So I'll tell, there are a couple of stories, I'd say, there are a couple of examples. SolarWinds was clearly one of them in terms of the cleverness of that attack and going to the back end where everyone might have thought they were secure, but they really weren't secure because the way things were updated caused an insecurity we didn't know about. Another good example, just in terms of our response, is the NotPetya worm from several years ago, which caused major destruction and disruption of the shipping industry, Maersk, among others. That was attributed to Russia. It was great in the sense that we brought a coalition of countries, I think it was like 12 countries at the end, who banded together and attributed that to Russia. But here was the problem, and this is a problem, the continuing problem that we face here, is it took about 6 months for that attribution to be announced. Great. The attribution announced, that was great. 6 months later, not as impactful. But we also didn't couple it with anything that we're going to do. So if you're going to wait 6 months, have something you're going to announce that you're going to do, whether it be sanctions or something else. Just announcing it and saying there'll be consequences down the line is not a way to deter actors. It's not a way to say we're strong on this. And so I think that's a good example. And my one, I have many funny stories as well. But one of the hackers I prosecuted was this hacker Kevin Mitnick, who's well known and now passed away. But he prolific hacker, very well-known hacker, one of the early hackers. But one of the things he did is he'd hack into the accounts of people he didn't like, security and other professionals. And he was kind of a phone freaker too. He would change your service account, so your residential line, when you picked it up, would ask you to deposit 25 cents. So that was more of a funny story.
All right. So thank you very much. And thank you, by the way, for the Cray reference in your joke a while. I'm not sure if half the people in the room know what that actually is. The Cray reference.
Oh, yeah, that's a slightly old one, yeah.
Yeah, all right. Then last but not least, all the way from Tokyo, Japan, Mr. Sasaki.
Yes, thank you very much. Of course, state-sponsored actors like China, Russia, and North Korea, and the non-state actors are challenges. And I have already touched on, attacks against critical infrastructure and the democratic processes and institutions. So I would like to add several aspects. And first, ransomware continues to be one of the most disruptive cyber threats, disrupting the operations of hospitals and the businesses in almost every sector of economies around the world. And the scale of this threat is global, and it is unfortunately growing. And I would also like to draw your attention to the need to address challenges posed by attacks targeting cryptocurrency markets and the cryptocurrency theft. And it is exploited, cyberspace is exploited for its illicit activities that fund its unlawful weapons of mass destruction and the ballistic missile program. And this is an example that shows that the security threat in the physical space and in the cyberspace are interrelated. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Sasaki. And Mr. Sasaki does raise a good point. Some of the most common exploits, phishing, smishing, ransomware, apply to all, right? It's just that the targets sometimes are more important than others. And the fact that a lot of the networks are dual use adds to the risk. I have a follow-up question for Mr. Painter. You did mention like after 6 or 12 months, there's some attribution that's done on particular state actors. What recommendations would you give? Like what action can we put at the end of that attribution?
So one thing is we've been better at testing the muscle, the response to this. So the more we do these joint attributions, I think the quicker we can do them, the stronger we can do them. We have to be careful that they not become so commonplace that people don't even pay attention anymore. So that's one of the challenges. But the other is we do have to couple them with action, and that requires collective will too, and that requires not just the Five Eyes countries who've been doing this for a while or the expanded coalition, but to get more countries to do it and to have decisive actions. Now, it's always going to be some things are going to be seen and some things are not going to be seen. but have something public to go and announce. And I think sanctions are clearly one that is, maybe used a lot now, but I think that's an important one. But we need to make clear that we're drawing a line where if there's unacceptable conduct, look, I completely support the diplomatic approaches. I'm glad that countries around the world, over 40 countries now have cyber diplomats. This has become more of a policy and diplomatic issue. And that's an important component of this because they're the ones who build those coalitions of countries who can help do this collective action. And there have been agreements in the UN about what the rules of the road are, voluntary rules of the road to be sure, but every country has endorsed them. So if we're going to enforce those and have accountability, we have to come together and be able to do that. So I think the thing is, look, attribution is going to take a while because there's political attribution and there's technical attribution, but we need to announce things when we do that and then follow up and not let it slip off the page. We have to actually make sure there is teeth in these responses, which is not always easy, frankly. I mean, in some countries with Russia now, we have done, because of Ukraine, we've done as much, I think, as we can. So how do you actually bring it home to them? And this is something that's unacceptable.
Yeah, and it's a good point with attribution because, you do raise a good point that you do point them out, but if no action is made, then it just keeps on doing it over and over again. Well, although it is a challenging
then it
question,
emboldens
right?
them. If you say to someone, this is, you have crossed the line and we're not going to do anything, then other people are looking in the sidelines and say, well, I guess there's no consequences for that. Why shouldn't I do that too?
And who do you think should champion such activity? Not every state is equal with respect to being able to act on it, right? Who do you think, or what should this be? Is this a UN thing, or is it a group of nations?
Well, there's a good historical example of the anti-proliferation initiatives where countries voluntarily came together and used the tools that they could do and contribute. And so not every country has the same capability. Not every country has the same tools or the relationship with the potential transgressor. So we need to have sort of a suite of options. We need to have a way of looking at what we can do, what each of our countries could do, how we can collaborate to do this, and bring pressure on those who are violating.
Yeah, and you raise a great point about anti-proliferation. There's this thing going on where they say, cyber zero-day attacks are the new weapons of mass destruction. They're traded and they're sold like weapons of mass destruction. So, same points that are made, right? Excellent. General Ann then mentioned a while ago that a lot of our cyber protection, at least in our case, we are dependent already on infrastructure that is already made available. And one of these, or some of this infrastructure, is cloud-based, right? So we do take advantage, for example, of a cloud provider's ability to protect, host, and in the case of Ukraine, keep alive IT and cyber infrastructure. So for Mr. Suroviec, if you could give a comment on that and your thoughts on this trend where countries are trying to nationalize more and keep it on-prem versus this distributed type of approach. Thank you.
Sure, and let me also kind of build on what Chris was talking about on attribution front, because it's great that the attribution happens, but the more important question is, so what? How do we actually use those learnings to get more secure? And that's why you see Microsoft and others in the industry issuing very kind of precise recommendations. How do we improve our security posture, learning from each of those sophisticated attacks? And it doesn't mean we always get everything right. We've been issued a report from the US government in the last couple of weeks, and we accepted all the recommendations to further strengthen our security posture. And frankly speaking, it's very understandable that as an organization that hosts and protects some of the most sensitive government data in the world, being the most attacked organization in the world, that our actions and the way we conduct ourselves are very scrutinized. The upside, and here the cloud comes into play, is whatever we learn from a single attack with a particular vector of attack, with a particular IP address used, particular spear phishing technique, we can apply the security from that particular attempt globally in the cloud in near real time. And that is a game changer from a perspective of organization that is trying to be pretty much in one-on-one combat against some of the most sophisticated nation-state organizations. We think that it's actually better to build on that threat intelligence in the cloud, and that's a big one. And I think the word that, or the phrase we haven't used here too many times, I'm surprised, is artificial intelligence, but on the defensive side. So one of our key, like I'm not in sales, but like one of our key products we are now at the moment, we see a lot of traction with customers is Security Copilot, because the key challenge that organizations have is how do you deal with so many false positives? How do you identify those that you actually need to look into and implement extra protections? And we use AI to help them identify those and understand them. So I think that the cloud has multiple roles on the threat intelligence, putting into actionable intelligence, actionable insights, and then at the same time, doing that in the real time based on all the global learnings as well.
Yes, and that your customers or people who use your service take advantage of the fact that you stare at trillions of signals per day, right? So it's that lessons learned from all of that activity that actually benefit customers as well. Not just for Microsoft, but all other players in this particular space as well. Excellent. So thank you very much. And for Mr. Sasaki, you mentioned some of the activities that Japan has been doing, and we'd like to thank your country as well for the ASEAN-Japan cooperation, which I believe I was able to attend one of your events as well. So thank you very much. I'd like your thoughts though on what are the possible next steps out of capability building? I know it's important. I know it's the first step. But I mean, let's be honest, we've been capability building for a while. So we also need to look at other areas of cooperation that you feel may be worth mentioning as well. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. At first, let me also add the comments on the attribution. So we also consider that public attribution in coordination with other countries, including Foreign Press Secretary statement and the technical advisories, will be effective to demonstrate the coalition to set out thresholds, norms, and rules, and to impose costs on attackers. And it also plays an important role of raising threat awareness domestically and internationally to use cyberspace and instruments such as clouds. So that it is really important to continue such collaboration among like-minded to ensure more effective cyber deterrence. And it is very important to expand, such collaboration. Cooperation, countries among like-minded. And the question on, as for the question on capacity building, of course, we have, various capacity building programs in ASEAN countries and the Indo-Pacific as well. And we are trying to, get and try to analyze lessons learned, which we did in ASEAN countries and the Indo-Pacific region. At the same time, to implement more effective capacity building efforts, we are trying to deepen our understanding on each country's vulnerabilities and to make our cooperation more tangible. So that we are trying to cooperate with ASEAN countries, of course, but not only with ASEAN countries, but also with, of course, like-minded countries, including the United States, and also with other organizations such as the World Bank Cybersecurity Maritime Trust Fund, and of course GFC as well, and others. So that enhancing capacity building efforts, on enhancing cybersecurity capacity building efforts. Cybersecurity cannot be ensured by a single country alone, nor can it be sufficiently ensured by the government efforts alone, so that we will expand cooperation with various countries and organizations.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's a good point as well, that General Aaron mentioned a while ago as well, like coordination among states are actually it's very important. Right now, we're pretty sure the threat actors share things, right? Their methods and their technology, and that we as states and organizations could do more in actually that sharing as well. Sorry, Mr. Pena.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on the capacity building front that is critically important, that when you go to these meetings in New York, these UN meetings and others, every country in the world, particularly the developing countries that are on the fence, That's their number one ask. They're happy to debate esoteric issues around norms and other things to them, but they need help now. And even more developed economies need help too. And so there are still countries within the ASEAN region that don't have national strategies. More have them now than before, that don't have national level certs, which are building blocks for all of this. So Japan's doing great work there. Singapore, the ASEAN Center of Excellence is great. That's a good initiative. On both the civilian side, there's also more work in the military. There's a military cyber group now in ASEAN. The more we can do of that, that is the tide that lifts all boats. If we can get countries up to that speed, that gets them more prepared, gets them more resilient, and prepares them to take, to be part of a larger collective response effort, which I think is important too. So it has dual purposes. It both helps them prepare, helps their own citizens prepare, but also helps them be part of a larger big tent like-minded community that will help us respond to these threats.
And development of such cyber infrastructure also has development outside of just the defense and protection capabilities.
In fact, I think we need to look at this as not just, again, a security issue, but a core development issue. This undergirds all the development efforts for digitization that we talk about. The UN has these UN development goals. Cyber and internet is not mentioned once in any of them, but it really undergirds most of them. So bringing those communities together and thinking about it as a development issue is important.
I think I'd like to pivot from what Chris said, and I think General Allen pounded on this. He mentioned the National Cybersecurity Plan of the Philippines, and we take that document, for example, and as to Chris's point that countries need help now. Philippines, obviously. I was talking about the surge of attacks earlier, and using that document, the NCSP, as a framework, there's that portion of the plan that states that, and these are the three areas where I think both our allies and those companies that have massive resources and global footprint, and with that, the lessons that come with that footprint can help the Philippines in a very distinct and very impactful way. And this is the combination of building a national cyber threat intel capability, which then feeds off into the ability of either organizational or sectoral incident response and SOCs to design and deploy these platforms, and the ability, for example, of the Armed Forces of the Philippines and with their plan to stand up a AFP Cyber Command to defend the entirety of Philippine cyberspace. So I think that would be a great take-off point for any partner for the Philippines to engage the country in terms of capacity building and that menu of other things that these countries or these companies can work with the Philippines on.
Excellent. So thank you very much. I'd like to open the floor to questions if there are any, or else I will ask all the questions. Yes, the lady in glasses.
Good afternoon. I'm Denise Osorio from PTV4. So if we're going to be focusing more on the masses, providing that we could actually we are able to probably experience security attacks just through certain certain phishing or directed attacks, clickbaits. So basically going down to a more on-the-ground level, how do we see, or what are the proposals on information dissemination or educating people, particularly for locals or Filipinos, do we have? Probably we could start with Microsoft, since there are a lot of Microsoft users.
Sure, and I think that goes back to the capacity building or capabilities building, because eventually cybersecurity is a shared responsibility from both cybersecurity professionals, but also individuals. So training is one angle, but I would pivot this to also another area where we have recently made an announcement here in the Philippines on the back of the Presidential Trade and Investment Mission of Secretary Gina Raimondo here, because we recognize that some of the strongest foundations of the Philippine state and any country in the democratic world is the democratic foundation. So we are actually extending very soon account guard protections, which allow to merge threat intelligence from personal and private accounts of any entities engaged in democratic electoral processes in order to strengthen and protect those processes. So that's just one of the examples of different programs we're rolling out here in the Philippines, helping to boost security ahead of the next elections.
And since you have the mic, I'd like to give a follow-up question. I get this question a lot and I don't really have an answer. So I'll ask you, how early do you think cyber hygiene should be taught?
It's funny. So I'll go a couple of years back. And as part of Safer Internet Day, I would go, as a couple of my colleagues as well, to one of the schools locally back in Brussels and spend an hour with the kids, which were 8, 10 years old, to talk about cybersecurity. And I was wondering, how do I tell them how important it is? And I remember I came up with this anecdote. I might have read it somewhere, so I don't want to violate anybody's intellectual property here. I asked the kids, like, hey, do you share your toothbrush with your best friend? And they're like, oh no, this is disgusting. Like, I would never do that. But why do you share a password with your best friend? And that's something would help to drive conversation with kids, which were started thinking about, like, oh, actually, yeah, I get that. And so I think that it's never too early. I think that cybersecurity, it's like digital technology is becoming such an integral part of our lives so early on. I'm not a parent, but there are many parents in the room. You would probably argue it's too early on in their lives, and I could maybe agree with you. Which means that we should also think about cybersecurity the same way. It's never too early to start thinking about threats that may come in all factors and forms.
All right, thank you very much. It's never too early. Another question?
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Malu Bartolome from Business Mirror. To General Allen, if it's possible, and to all our panelists. If there came a time that that the Philippines is attacked by in cyberspace, can the Philippines invoke the MDT with the Americans?
I think the question is, can the Philippines invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty for a cyber attack? I think was the question. Excuse me, microphone.
I don't think that we have an answer to that at this point. But if you want to look for guidance in where this is going, NATO has determined that there could be a day when, at a particular threshold, a cyber attack, which typically would destroy critical or compromise critical infrastructure or take human life or limb, should it be sufficient, it could be justification to invoke Article 5 of the NATO treaty, which is an attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. Now, this is a bilateral treaty between the United States and the Philippines. My guess would be that we would have to have the conversation to ensure we understand what the threshold might be of an attack that would be so sufficiently damaging, either to critical infrastructure or the taking of Philippine life, that the United States and the Philippines would mutually defend each other as a result of this attack. It's a very good question, though.
So let me build on what the general just said. It shouldn't really matter if it's a cyber attack versus a non-cyber attack. If it has the same effects as a kinetic attack does, then it should be under any of the treaties we have, frankly. Although I'm not an expert on the bilateral treaty between the U.S. and the Philippines in that way. But I would say that Article 5 is clearly a good example. But even in other contexts, I know the U.S. and Australia, for instance, have specifically with respect to their joint defense agreement said cyber is covered. So a number of countries are updating those mutual defense treaties to say, look, cyber is covered, and it should be, because if you use a cyber attack and it kills a bunch of people, why is that different than a kinetic attack, assuming you can attribute to the nation state actor?
I'll make the point that the 51 defense treaty between the United States and the Philippines doesn't have that stipulation, but there is an article in there where it could be interpreted that article in that mutual defense treaty could apply to a cyber attack.
All right, thank you very much. I think we have, oh yes. Yes, ma'am.
Well, first of all, thank you for highlighting the $5 billion investment by Microsoft to strengthen Australia's infrastructure around cybersecurity. So thank you for pointing that out on my behalf. My question to all the members, in Australia, we also have sanctions, cyber sanctions, and we've actually exercised them on actual actors. But given the issue around how long it takes for attribution to take place, and then the need for, something with teeth, what other things can like-minded countries collectively do to provide that deterrence other than sanctions? And what kind of sanctions are most effective if you can't think of other methods?
So my answer to that in part is look at what we do with everything else. I mean, again, don't treat cyber as a completely separate thing. When we have other violations of international law or other big problems with countries, nation state aggressors, we use all the tools in our tool set, right? Sanctions are one. They're an important one. I think the best sanctions are ones that are targeted to actually have an effect and to actually cause some pain. Now, sometimes they cause a pain in the country who's leveraging them as well, but you got to make that balance. And I think we need to be able to expand the way we use sanctions. Now, there are challenges. I don't know how it works in Australia. In the US, we can rely on classified intelligence to do sanctions. The European Union can't do that in their cyber toolkit. So that's a challenge, I think. But I think there's more we can do there. But the other tools we can use are, you can do law enforcement indictments. Now, indicting nation-state actors doesn't necessarily have much of an impact, although it limits their travel. We did this with China and the theft of intellectual property back when I was in the government, and that had, I think, a pretty major impact. If nothing else, I think it signaled the Chinese they're taking this seriously, and I think that brought them to the table when we reached the intellectual property deal that I helped negotiate. So that's a good example, I think. We use diplomatic pressure, including at the various highest political levels, presidential and prime minister levels, and don't just do it one-off, but make it sustained and say, this is a real problem, and this is a big enough problem that it's not just a cyber problem. This is going to affect our overall relationship, assuming we have a relationship with that country. So I think that's important. And I think we use the other tools, that we have too. I mean, we're unlikely to use kinetic tools in the cyber thing unless there was an actual death and serious injury. But there's also cyber operational tools and other things we can use. We have to look at that mix and use them all together and not separately. And then if we do that collectively, we're stronger as well.
All right. I think we're out of time, and there's no more time for questions. But maybe a few words from each of the speakers, just to wrap up. If you were to say something that you want the people in the room to remember after they leave the room, what would it be?
I'll just pick up from the two previous points of General Allen and Ambassador Yu. On the point of a provision in our MDT which we could potentially use, I think a necessary precondition to that is a clear signaling from the Philippines that an attack on its cyberspace, regardless of the physical effects, should be construed in an official capacity as an attack on Philippine sovereignty and territory. That being a necessary precondition, it will then make it easier, for example, for our ally like the US or other allies, which are not only in a capacity, but are otherwise predispositioned to assist us in that manner, to come in and assist us. Now, as to the question of Ambassador Yu, the problem fundamentally with cybersecurity has always been the identification of the hands on the keyboard, or the attribution problem. Before you think about sanctions and any other actions after an attack, you should first be able to identify the perpetrating party. Now, that said, this is where a multi-nation perspective is very important, whether it's trying to establish attribution, or in the case, for example, of ransomware, a multi-nation effort to take down. Look, our takedown rate globally is just 2 ransomware groups per year. And you're talking about at least 200 known ransomware groups. Now, the ability to identify, to take down, and even recover the proceeds of ransomware, to me, is an important big step. And then you multiply that across as many types of cyber criminal groups or APTs and the types of attacks that they are organized around is an important, to me, an important demonstration of the dictum that says crime that does not pay, because as of yet, the absolute value of cybercrime has far exceeded the absolute value of illegal drugs. And that alone constitutes a big problem because it signals to everyone that there's a clear incentive in entering into cybercrime. And that's why you're drawing a lot of threat actors into that space, which again is causing a lot of problems to a lot of countries.
Ambassador Yu, I think it's a great question, and obviously, as Microsoft, as a private sector entity, there's a prerogative of the states to respond to any of such attributed attacks. We are to a limit within the parameters of the law. We're disrupting some of those actors, redirecting traffic from the domains we take control of to sinkholes. But I think that the macro point, and that's what we can do, is to raise the costs of those attacks, because it's too easy at this moment and it's too cheap. And a great country, which again, I'm going to go back to Europe, which you can give example of, is Estonia. Estonia faced one of the first, really kind of large-scale attacks from Russia. It was years ago. But last time I checked, Estonia still operates as a country, despite being right up there, a Russian neighbor, facing unprecedented number of aggressive operations, because they leveraged the infrastructure of the global hyperscale cloud, and they work with the industry and with other countries to raise the cost of those attacks, and they've been doing it successfully. So I think that there's no country too small. If you can run it in a country of 1 million people, you can probably do it in the Philippines with 100 millions.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Sasaki?
Yes, at the outset, I would like to emphasize that Philippines is an important partner of friendship between Japan and the Philippines, underscored by friendly and historic ties through decades of exchanges between the two peoples, and upheld by shared fundamental values of freedom, democracy, respect for fundamental human rights, and the rule of law. So that's why I am really encouraged that Mr. Francis mentioned Japan is one of the partners in the field of cybersecurity. And we will further strengthen our cyber diplomacy and the cooperation with the Philippines and beyond by sharing awareness of existing potential threats and accumulating tangible and concrete dialogues and projects to realize a free, fair, and secure cyberspace. And as for the question posed by the ambassador, it is really important to consider a kind of tool set which includes public attribution, diplomatic communication, private diplomatic communication, and the law enforcement activities and sanctions as well, and consider an appropriate action, and consider effectively combining these means to deter threat actors. And it is also important to expand a series of dialogues between government and the government, public, private, civil society, and academia, and a series of tangible cooperation to aim to foster trust, reduce miscalculations, and reduce threat itself. So that in this context, this kind of dialogue is really beneficial to help to deepen our understanding and the cooperation in the field of cybersecurity. Thank you very much.
All right, so thank you very much. And I mean, that opened the kind of words like, when does it cross from law enforcement to something more? But we're out of time. So Mr. Painter?
So on the law enforcement side, I think we've been far better than we used to be. We have grown over the last 20 years in targeting and going after these criminal organized groups collectively as countries, getting inside their conspiracies so they don't trust themselves. The ransomware, I think, has been a watershed change because it made governments around the world pay more attention to this than ever before, because of this, it's not just taking information, it's disruption, which really raises the political cost. So I think we've seen some good activity, not enough, I agree, but I think that's been good. On the general attribution issue, though, I don't really agree that attribution is hard, to be sure, and when you do nation-state attribution collectively, it's a political issue, it's not just a technical issue, but it's not impossible. This idea that we can't actually figure out who's doing this stuff is often wrong. You can look in the criminal, you look at not just the digital footprints, but where the money's going. On the nation state side, you look at their motivations, you look at the other things. It's not, you don't have to prove it beyond any doubt at all. You have to be able to prove it with high confidence. And you can do that. And of course, you'll have the people you accuse. I mean, Russia, when they were invading Ukraine with the little green men, were saying, oh, it's not us. Of course it was them. When you look at, if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, it's a duck. And so you do that in cyberspace too. If it's a major activity, even though nation states are clever and using proxies and other ways to hide their presence or who they're doing it, over time, you can do those attributions. You can look at motivations, you can look at the actors, you can look at the tool sets, and you can figure it out. And then the question is what action we take. Yes, it will take time sometimes to do that, but then we have to be able to act quickly thereafter and make sure we couple those attributions with action. And I think that's a challenge going forward. And frankly, getting countries who are understandably a little queasy about joining those attributions because of political and other issues, to be comfortable saying, look, this is to protect you too. How can we work together, even if you're not going to point the finger to take some action?
All right, so again, we're out of time. So to borrow the language of this conference in general, Alan, let's try to avoid escalating this to phase 1 by ensuring we respond properly in phase 0. And let's keep it at phase 0 for now. So thank you very much and have a good day.
Thank you very much again to our panelists, Mr. Chris Painter, Mr. Maciek Surowiec, Mr. Keiichiro Sasaki, Mr. Francisco Ashley Asadillo, and our moderator, Dr. William Emmanuel Yu. So we'll have a quick photo opportunity, please. And with Professor Manhit and Mr. Vivek Shilukuri. Okay, maybe also invite our earlier speakers, Ambassador Yu, General Allen, and also Ambassador Hartman is here. Sir, one more photo, please. Okay.
Well, since I'm the only woman, I think I have to sort of like in the middle.
All right, thank you very much again to our panelists.
Thank you. Well done. You just did really well. I'm really impressed. Thank you. Thank you. Great conversation. Lots of really great.
Thank you, General. All right, so okay, we're not yet done. May we request everyone to please take your seats again. We just have one more final speech to deliver and to listen to. Okay? So today has been a very informative and insightful day. And to wrap up today's discussion and to formally close our event, may we call back on stage the Program Director and Senior Fellow at the Technology and National Security Program of the Center for a New American Security, Mr. Vivek Shilukuri.
Thanks, everyone. I know it's been a long day, and I will therefore not keep these remarks particularly long. And I appreciate everybody for their rapt attention and patience. As our friends mentioned, I'm from the Center for New American Security. We're very grateful to co-host this event with Strat-based ADR. We're a bipartisan think tank in Washington, D.C., and I bring that up just to emphasize that in Washington, there is a bipartisan recognition that the Philippines and there's not a lot of bipartisan recognition about a lot of things, so I appreciate the laughter, and I've observed it firsthand. But there is a strong bipartisan recognition in the United States that the Philippines is a critical critical partner, not just to the United States, but a critical player in the future of the entire Indo-Pacific region. And I think a recognition that there's a lot of work to do to deepen that partnership, but we have to be clear-eyed about the challenges. And I want to thank Ambassador Carlson, Ambassador Yu, General Allen, many other distinguished speakers and attendees here today. And I also want to thank the staff of Strat-Based ADR and the staff of CNAS for all of their work behind the scenes. I think they deserve a round of applause. I would also like to recognize the staff at the beautiful Peninsula Hotel. They've been working very hard all day to keep this event running on time, and mostly on time, I'd say. If it's not on time, it's not their fault. It's certainly our fault. But I think this has been I also want to thank Microsoft for their generous support of this program. The workshop that we've organized today is part of a broader research effort that we're pursuing, looking at cybersecurity in the Indo-Pacific. This is actually the third of 4 workshops that we've organized. I was in Tokyo and Taipei with some people here in April for similar conversations, and we're actually going to Seoul tomorrow to have our 4th conversation on Thursday. And I think we've had a very substantive conversation today, and I don't want to go on for too long, but I do think there were a few observations that I just wanted to make sure we were closing out with the day. So one is that the events last week in the West Philippine Sea are provocative, and they drive national attention here and in Washington, D.C. and around the world for good reason. But I think it can be easy to forget, and it suggests that it suggests escalation in the conflict in that region and the potential conflict in that region. But I think it can be easy to forget that escalation has been happening in the cyber domain for years, and it often does not receive the same level of attention. It's not received with the same reception of provocation, even though arguably the consequences, we should ask ourselves, are the consequences of a hostile state or like China or Russia pre-positioning themselves in critical infrastructure, stealing critical government data, is that any less significant than what we're seeing in the West Philippine Sea? Because for too long, the cyber conversation has been shunted to the side, viewed as a technical issue for the cyber people over here, and then the national security people over here can talk about the more traditional threats that countries like the Philippines or the United States face. We haven't treated cybersecurity for too long as the urgent national security issue that it is. And General Allen, I think, made a very compelling case for why we should, and I appreciate that. I think a few other thoughts is the cyber domain, as others have said repeatedly today, does not exist in isolation. And so neither can our policies. And that goes from within governments, making sure it's not just the cyber agency over here who's worried about it, but all agencies, whether you're working on healthcare or labor or you're the armed services. And it means integration not just within government, but within a country. So within across government and the private sector and civil society. And it's integration across countries between the United States and the Philippines and Australia and Japan, but also across the region. And I think the final point that was, 2 more points. One is that Russia and China and others have used, as General Allen mentioned, cyber activity as a form of stage zero for potential, let's hope, as the previous moderator mentioned, potential escalatory operations. And I think that makes it very urgent for all of the world to pay attention to what is happening in stage zero, whether it's Ukraine, whether it's Taiwan, whether it's the Philippines. And it's important for governments around the world to listen and to learn and to be curious about what's happening so that they don't realize those lessons too late. And finally, I think it's important to understand that cyber threats are not only a threat to data, they're not only a threat to our national security, they're a threat to the economy, which is underpinning of national security. And as many people mentioned today, they are also a threat to our shared democratic values. And it is extremely important that as countries like the Philippines, Japan, Australia, the United States, and everyone else responds to cybersecurity threats, that we do not lose ourselves and our commitment to open societies, free expression, intellectual property, and the rule of law. These are the things that undergird the U.S.-Philippine relationships and the other bilateral relationships in this room, and it would be a tragedy for us to surrender our commitment to those values and shared interests as we secure the cyber domain. So let me just end with that and say that when you put all of this together, I keep saying I'm going to end with that. I never end with it. But when you put all of it together, it suggests that in so many ways, the cybersecurity challenge of our time is the perfect test for any nation that is committed to an open, secure, and free Indo-Pacific region. The threats are evolving quickly, and new threats demand new thinking, and they will quickly overwhelm private sector companies or governments that are trying to apply old thinking and old policies and old tools to a new world. And I think this is an opportunity for creativity, for collaboration, for innovation, and continued dialogue. It's easy to say that in rooms like this. It's very hard to do, which is why the real work happens after discussions like this. But we just want to say we are so grateful to everyone here for making the time, and to StratBase for their terrific efforts to organize this conference. And thank you so much, everybody.
And that ends our conference for today. Let's all give everyone a round of applause again, please. Thank you very much once again to all of our speakers, panelists, guests, and participants who joined us today. And we hope you all have a good rest of the day. Thank you.